Maine kept steady as the designer woman worked, and the rich man didn't interfere. Morning did not arrive all at once in Harbor Town. It came in layers. First the gray, then the sound of water moving against wood, then the outline of the dock appearing through thinning fog, as if the town was deciding, slowly, to show itself. Iris Calder had already been working for nearly an hour. The workshop door was open just enough to let the light in. Fabric lay across the table in clean lines, weighted at the corners. Her hands moved steadily, not fast, not hesitant. Outside, the air smelled of salt and damp wood. A gull called somewhere beyond the roofline and then went quiet again. Across the narrow street, Caleb Rowan stopped. He had not planned to. His walk usually carried him past the workshop without pause, along the curve of the harbor road where the water came closest to town. That morning, something in the arrangement of light and movement slowed him. Not enough to draw attention, just enough to register. From where he stood, he could see Iris through the open doorway. She did not look up. Her focus stayed on the fabric, on the alignment of edges, on a detail small enough that it required her full attention. The machine rested silent beside her. She worked by hand, needle moving in and out, thread pulled tight and set aside before the next stitch began. Caleb stayed where he was. He did not step closer. He did not turn away immediately either. The moment might have passed unnoticed if not for the man inside the cafe across the street, wiping down a table near the window. He looked up at the wrong time and saw the pause. Not the reason for it, just the shape of it. A man standing still, a woman working, the space between them unbroken. The cafe man went back to his table, but the image stayed with him. Outside, a light gust pushed the workshop door wider. Iris reached out with her foot and nudged it back without lifting her eyes. The fabric stayed in place. The thread did not tangle. Caleb shifted his weight once, then stepped back into motion. He walked past the workshop without looking in again, his pace returning to what it had been before. The dock lay ahead, its boards, dark with moisture, the tide low enough to expose the rocks beneath. Behind him, the door settled. The light inside the workshop narrowed. Iris continued, working as if nothing had occurred. From the dock, a fisherman noticed Caleb pass and raised his chin in greeting. Caleb returned it. Nothing else was exchanged. What lingered was not the pause itself, but the fact that it had been seen. By mid-morning, the town had taken its usual shape. Deliveries arrived late. Someone swept a step and stopped when the wind picked up. A crate was set down closer to the edge than it should have been and left there. At the workshop, Iris finished one seam and began another. Outside, footsteps passed, then faded. She did not mark who they belonged to. At the cafe, the man by the window mentioned the moment in passing, not as gossip, just as something observed. He could have gone in, he said. Did not. The woman behind the counter shrugged. Some people know where to stop. That was all. By the time Caleb reached the far end of the dock, the fog had lifted completely. The harbor lay open, steady, unremarkable. Boats rested against their lines. The town held its breath only long enough to notice that nothing had been interrupted. And somewhere between the workshop door and the cafe window, a quiet question settled into the morning. Not spoken aloud, but present all the same. What mattered more? The work that continued, or the moment someone chose not to step into it? The town settled into itself as the morning stretched on. What had begun in fog now revealed its edges. Not sharply, just enough for outlines to hold. The harbor came into view piece by piece, the dock first, then the water beyond it, then the far line where sea and sky met without urgency. Winter light lay flat across the town. It had not brightened things so much as exposed them. The grain of wooden siding, the uneven paint on railings, the way salt had worked its way into corners and stayed there. Houses stood close to the water, built to last rather than to impress, their porches facing the wind without complaint. The air was cold and damp, carrying the smell of seaweed and metal. It clung to coats and hair. Breath showed briefly, then vanished. Down at the dock, the tide moved in its familiar rhythm. Waves did not crash. They pressed, released, and pressed again, steady enough that no one bothered to look unless they had reason to. Ropes creaked against posts. A buoy knocked once, then settled. Seagulls called from a distance, their voices stretched thin by the air. They did not circle. They rested on pylons and roofs, watching the water with patience learned over time. Caleb Rowan walked the length of the dock without changing his pace. He did not hurry through it, and he did not linger either. His boots made a dull sound against the boards, softened by moisture. He passed a stack of crates and did not check their alignment. He stepped around a shallow puddle without thinking about it. From the far end, a fisherman looked up and nodded. Caleb returned the nod. That was the extent of their exchange. The town preferred it that way. Past the dock, the road curved inland for a short stretch before bending back toward the water. It was a narrow road, edged by grass worn thin by salt and tires. The curve slowed traffic naturally. No sign was needed. A delivery truck passed, spraying fine mist behind it. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the wheel. Caleb raised his hand in return. On the other side of the road, the cafe windows reflected the harbor. Inside, the day unfolded at its own pace. Mugs warm hands. Plates clinked softly. A radio played low enough to be ignored. Someone near the window noticed Caleb pass again, moving in the opposite direction now, and then turned back to their coffee. Near the center of town, the workshop door stood open just enough to let the light in. Inside, Iris Calder worked at the long table, fabric spread out in measured sections. The room smelled faintly of iron cloth and oil from the machine that rested nearby. The walls were marked with years of use. Shelves held spools, folded materials, tools that had earned their place by being reliable. Outside, the wind shifted and nudged the door wider. Iris adjusted it with her foot, then returned to her work without looking up. The sound of waves reached her in a muted way, filtered through wood and glass. It was always there, part of the background like breath. The town moved around her without pressing in. A woman passed, carrying groceries, pausing briefly to greet someone across the street. A child ran ahead, boots splashing lightly through shallow water left by the mist. The child slowed when called and waited without argument. Above it all, the sky stayed gray. Not threatening, not welcoming, just present. As the morning edged toward noon, a fine drizzle began to fall. It did not arrive with ceremony. It simply appeared, dots darkening the pavement, softening sound further. The town adjusted in small ways. Hoods were raised. Hands moved into pockets. Doors closed a little more firmly. Caleb crossed the road again and stepped under the awning near the cafe, waiting for the drizzle to pass. He did not look inside. He watched the water instead, how the surface broke differently under the light rain. Someone standing beside him noticed the way he waited without checking a watch. That is how it goes, the person said, more to themselves than to him. Caleb nodded once. The drizzle faded as quickly as it had come. The town resumed its rhythm without marking the change. Down by the dock, the boards darkened where rain had settled and lightened again as the wind passed over them. A rope loosened slightly, then held. No one adjusted it. In the workshop, Iris finished one section of stitching and set it aside. She stood for a moment, stretching her hands, then returned to the table. Outside, footsteps passed. She did not track who they belonged to. From the cafe window, someone noticed the way the town absorbed the rain and let it go. Someone else noticed that nothing seemed to demand attention. That was the nature of the place. Rough on the outside, weathered, salt-stained, built to withstand more than it let on. Gentle underneath, in the way space was given, in the way silence was allowed, in the way people moved without testing one another. By early afternoon, the fog had lifted completely. The harbor lay open, gray-blue and calm. Boats rested where they had been tied, their presence steady. Caleb walked the road once more, following its curve as it bent away from the water and returned again. Iris worked with the door open, light shifting across her table as clouds moved overhead. From time to time, someone noticed both of them in their separate places, each occupied, neither interrupting the other. No one named it. The town did not require naming. It held its shape through repetition and restraint, through weather and routine, through moments that passed without being claimed. And in that quiet world, the day continued, not building toward anything, not resolving anything, simply allowing itself to be exactly what it was. Caleb Rowan woke before the town decided what shape the day would take. The light outside his window was still undecided, neither night nor morning, a thin gray that softened the edges of everything it touched. He lay still for a moment, listening. The ocean moved beyond the glass, steady, patient. Wind brushed along the siding, then passed on. He stood without turning on the light. The window opened a few inches. Cold air came in, carrying salt and dampness, the faint smell of metal from the dock. He stayed there until the chill reached his hands, then closed it again when the wind shifted. In the kitchen, he filled the kettle halfway and set on the stove. Coffee grounds went into the French press, measured by habit rather than thought. When the water was ready, he poured slowly, watching the surface rise and settle. He waited. He drank standing at first, then moved to the chair near the window. The mug warmed his hands. Outside, fog still held the harbor loosely, thinning where the water reflected what little light there was. He drank without hurry and set the mug down when it was finished. A notebook lay closed on the table. He opened it and wrote a few lines, then stopped. He sketched the curve of the shoreline, erased part of it, and left the rest unfinished. The pencil stayed where it fell. By the time he stepped outside, the road was damp and dark from mist. He walked toward the shore, his pace even, not fast enough to draw attention, not slow enough to linger. The seals were already there. They rested on a low rock just offshore, dark shapes against the gray water. One lifted its head when Caleb approached, then settled again. He stopped several yards away and sat on a drifted log, hands resting on his knees. He did not move closer. He did not speak. He stayed until one seal slid into the water, then another, until the rock was empty again. The tide pulled back, leaving a thin line of foam that dissolved on its own. Farther out, fishing boats moved along the edge of the fog, engines low. A man on one boat raised a hand. Caleb raised his in return. Nothing else passed between them. He walked along the beach and picked up a length of driftwood pushed higher by the last tide. It was smooth in places, rough in others. He turned it once in his hands and carried it with him. Mid-morning brought him into town. He chose his stops carefully. The routine allowed for no more than 3 places in a day, and only if they made sense together. The grocery store came first. He took bread, soup, apples. Nothing extra. At the counter, he waited without filling the pause. He paid, nodded, and stepped aside. Next was the repair shop near the bend in the road. He set the driftwood down outside and went in. "I need sandpaper," he said. The man behind the counter slid a few sheets across without asking what it was for. Caleb paid, thanked him, and stepped back out. That was 2. He did not add a third right away. Instead, he sat on a low stool outside his place and worked the driftwood slowly, letting the grain guide his hands. Dust collected at his feet. People passed. Some nodded. Some did not. No one stopped. When the edge felt right, he set the wood aside and brushed his hands against his coat. Later, he walked to the diner. Same building, same counter, same soup. He took the seat near the window, not because it belonged to him, but because it was open. He ate without hurry, left cash on the table, and nodded once to the woman behind the counter before leaving. That made 3. The afternoon stayed quiet. He returned home along the longer route, the one that curved away from the water before coming back to it. Fog rolled in low along the road, thinning as the light grew stronger. He paused once to look out at the harbor, then continued on. Inside, he sanded the driftwood again, just enough to remove a rough spot he had missed earlier, then set on the table by the window. He wrote a few more lines in the notebook, then closed it. The wind picked up late in the day. He opened the window to listen, then closed it again when the gusts grew stronger. Toward evening, he walked the shoreline once more. Not far, just enough to feel the change in air. He stood watching the water until the cold reached his hands, then turned back. This was not a church day. Sunday came less often. When it did, he sat in the back pew and stayed there. No prayer spoken, no doctrine, only wood, light, and the way the space held still long enough to rest in. But today was not that day. Tonight, he did not go to the bar. The cafe had already been his third place. He stayed in. He warmed soup, ate standing at the counter, rinsed the bowl, and set it to dry. He moved the driftwood slightly, clearing space on the table, then left it where it was. Outside, the harbor settled into night. Boats rested against their lines. The water kept its pace. He closed the shutters against the wind and sat until the room cooled. Then he turned off the light and went to bed. The routine would repeat. Not exactly. Never exactly. Some days the cafe would be replaced by the library. Some days the post office would take the place of the grocery store. The bar would come on certain evenings, quiet ones, a single drink, a nod to the bartender, then home. But the structure held. Wake before the day decided itself. Move through the town without claiming space. Do what needed doing and leave the rest untouched. In a place like this, the routine did not announce healing. It did not require recognition. It simply allowed the days to stack gently, one after another, until the shape of them became steady enough to stand inside without effort. And as the town moved around him, Caleb moved with it, present, measured, and unremarkable, letting the work of living take the time it needed, and no more. By the time Iris Calder entered the frame of Caleb Rowan's days, she had already been there for a long while. She belonged to the town in ways that did not require explanation. On that afternoon, the lights sat low and pale, filtered through a thin veil of cloud that never quite became rain. The harbor carried on with its small, repeating sounds. Lines tapped against wooden masts. A door closed somewhere down the street, not hurried, not delayed. Caleb was finishing a slow walk along the edge of the water when he noticed her again. Not suddenly. She was standing near the outdoor work table behind the general store, the one locals used when they needed space more than shelter. A roll of fabric rested beside her, weighted with a stone. She wore a dark coat that had seen more than one winter, the hem brushed clean but never pressed. Her hair was tied back without care for symmetry. Someone greeted her as they passed. She answered without stopping what she was doing. It was an ordinary exchange. No curiosity attached to it. No introduction required. Caleb paused near the end of the dock, not because of her presence, but because the tide had shifted just enough to expose a familiar cluster of rocks. He leaned on the railing and let his eyes rest where they always did when he was not trying to be anywhere else. From that angle, Iris was partly obscured by stacked crates. He could see her hands more clearly than her face. She worked steadily, measuring once, cutting once. When a gust came in from the water, she reached out and held the fabric down with her palm until the wind passed. She did not look around to see who had noticed. A fisherman set a crate down near her table and asked if it was in the way. She shook her head. "It is fine right there." That was all. She did not ask his name. She did not ask what he was hauling. He did not linger. Later, Caleb crossed paths with her closer to the post office. She stood just inside the doorway, waiting for someone ahead of her to finish. When the door swung wider, cold air rushed in, and she stepped back without complaint. The person in front of her apologized. She waved it off, eyes already down on the envelope in her hands. Caleb noticed that she did not fill the space with questions. When it was her turn, she slid the envelope across the counter, listened, nodded once, and stepped aside. The clerk thanked her by name. She answered with a small smile that did not ask for more. Outside, she stopped to adjust the strap of her bag. The motion was efficient, practiced. Nothing about it invited help. Caleb passed her then, close enough to register the faint scent of fabric. And clean soap. She shifted slightly to give him room, not because she needed to, but because that was how people moved in this town. Their eyes met briefly. No pause followed. No recognition asked to be acknowledged. She looked away first, not out of avoidance, but because there was nothing to hold on to. As she continued down the street, someone else fell in a step beside her, talking about a delivery that had come in late. She listened. She responded when needed. When they parted ways, there was no visible change in her pace. From the cafe window, someone noticed that the man by the harbor had slowed again. Not stopped, just slowed. The town did not react. It rarely did. By late afternoon, Iris was back near her workspace, packing away what she had finished. She folded the remaining fabric carefully and tucked it under her arm. Before leaving, She swept the surface of the table with her sleeve, removing threads and dust, leaving it ready for whoever might need it next. No one asked why she did that. Caleb watched from across the street, unseen, unremarked. He did not move toward her. He did not calculate whether he should. She turned once, scanning the street not for people, but for weather. The sky remained undecided. She adjusted her coat and headed toward the curve of the road that led inland. As she walked, a woman standing outside the bakery observed the way Iris made space for others without stepping aside too far. The woman noticed how no one followed her with their eyes for long. It was the kind of noticing that asked nothing in return. When Iris disappeared from view, the harbor returned to its steady rhythm. Caleb remained where he was for another moment, hands resting on the rail, eyes on the water. The day had not shifted. Nothing had been claimed. And yet, the shape of the afternoon had changed. Not because someone had entered it loudly, but because someone had been there safely without asking to be understood. The first contact happened without ceremony. It did not announce itself. It did not gather attention. It took place in a narrow space between two ordinary movements, the kind that usually pass without being remembered. Late morning light settled across the street near the cafe, pale and steady. The drizzle from earlier had left the pavement. Dark, the air smelling faintly of wet wood and salt. Inside, cups clinked softly. Outside, the awning held a thin line of water at its edge before letting it fall. Caleb Rowan stood near the counter by the door, waiting. He was not in a hurry. He had already chosen this as his third place for the day. He held his coffee with both hands, letting the heat reach his fingers. The room was quiet enough that no one needed to raise their voice. Iris Calder entered while he was still there. She paused just inside, long enough to let the door close behind her without slamming. She took in the room with a glance that did not linger. When she stepped forward, she chose the open space near the window, not the counter. The barista looked up. Same as usual? Yes, Iris said. One word. No explanation. She set her bag down by her feet and waited, hands resting loosely at her sides. She did not check her phone. She did not scan the room again. Caleb shifted slightly to make space when she moved closer to the counter. The adjustment was small, automatic. Excuse me, she said. Go ahead, he answered. Their voices did not overlap. She stepped forward, placed her order slip on the counter, and stepped back again. The distance between them settled into something workable. Neither of them filled it. The barista set 2 cups down. 1 cream, the barista said, sliding one toward Iris. Thank you, she replied. Caleb picked up his cup at the same time. Their hands came close without touching. Outside, a gull called once and then went quiet. They moved toward the door together, not because they planned to leave at the same time, but because the timing happened to align. Caleb reached the door first and held it open. He did not gesture. He did not comment. Thanks, Iris said as she passed. You are welcome, he said. That was all. They stepped out into the light, each turning slightly in a different direction before realizing the road ahead curved the same way. They walked side by side for several steps without adjusting their pace. A delivery truck passed slowly, tires hissing on damp pavement. Both of them paused at the curb and waited. When it passed, they continued on. I will be at the work table later, Iris said, not looking at him. Okay, Caleb replied. He did not ask what she was working on. She did not offer. At the corner, she stopped and adjusted the strap of her bag again. He slowed, then stopped as well, giving her space without stepping away. She finished, nodded once, and turned down the shorter street toward the general store. He continued along the harbor road. From the cafe window, someone noticed the exchange. Not the words, the timing. 2 people leaving together, walking briefly in the same direction, separating without hesitation. The person returned to their seat without mentioning it. Down the street, Iris reached the outdoor table and set her coffee down beside her folded fabric. She took a sip, then began laying out her materials. The cup stayed where it was, untouched by her work. Across town, Caleb reached the end of the dock and rested his hands on the railing. He drank the last of his coffee and set the cup on a bench, planning to take it back inside later. Neither of them looked for the other. The moment did not ask to be revisited. It existed as a completed thing, warm enough to register, light enough to let go. A woman passing the cafe door noticed that nothing lingered after it. No turning back, no checking, just two paths continuing side by side for a brief stretch, then separate again, as if that had always been the arrangement. The town absorbed it the way it absorbed everything else. Quietly, without comment. And for those who happened to see it, there was a subtle permission in the way it ended, a recognition that not every meeting needed to become more than what it already was. The shift did not begin where anyone expected it to. It began with a task that did not need doing. The morning after their brief exchange at the cafe, the harbor woke to a low tide that revealed more rock than usual. The boards along the public walkway near the dock had dried unevenly, leaving one loose plank lifted just enough to catch a careless step. People had been stepping around it for days. Someone would fix it eventually. It was not urgent. Caleb Rowan noticed it while passing through, coffee finished, hands free. He stopped, not long enough to draw attention, and tested the plank with his boot. It shifted and settled again, still loose. He looked around once. No one was watching closely. He crouched and pressed it down with both hands. It did not hold. From a supply shed nearby, a coil of rope and a small box of nails sat half open. They had been there since last season. Caleb did not hesitate. He carried the box to the plank, selected two nails, and drove them in with the back of a wrench he had been carrying in his coat pocket from earlier work at home. The sound was muted by the damp wood. 2 strikes each. No more. The plank lay flat. He stood, brushed his hands against his coat, and returned the box to the shed. The rope stayed where it was. He did not check his work again. A fisherman walking past slowed, then stopped. "You did not have to do that," the man said. Caleb nodded once. "It is done." The fisherman looked down at the plank, then back up. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, then closed it. "Well," he said, and continued on. By mid-morning, the dock carried on as usual. What changed was not the plank. It was the way the town responded to the act. No one thanked him loudly. No one gathered. A few people noticed and adjusted their steps without comment. The plank became part of the walkway again, unremarkable. At the cafe, someone mentioned it in passing. "Looks like someone fixed that board." "About time," someone else said. No name was attached. Iris Calder arrived near the outdoor work table later that morning, carrying fabric folded under her arm. She set her bag down and began arranging her materials. The wind came off the water in short bursts, lifting the edges of cloth. She placed a stone on one corner and worked around it. Caleb passed on the opposite side of the street, hands in his pockets, eyes forward. He did not slow. He did not stop. She did not look up. The town noticed the absence of reaction as much as the action itself. By early afternoon, the wind had picked up again. A sign near the corner of the general store, one that advertised nothing specific anymore, had loosened from its hook. It swung and tapped against the siding in a slow, irregular rhythm. People passed it without comment. Caleb reached it. On his return from the grocery store, bread tucked under his arm. He stood for a moment, listening to the sound. He reached up, lifted the sign from its hook, and leaned it against the wall where it would not swing. He did not search for wire. He did not secure it further. The tapping stopped. A woman coming out of the store paused. "You can leave it," she said, not sharply. He nodded. "It will stay." She looked at the sign, then at him. "All right." She walked on. From across the street, Iris watched the movement only long enough to register that the sound had ended. She did not turn fully. Her hands continued to work. When Caleb passed her table this time, closer than before, he did not address her. She did not address him. Later, as the afternoon wore on, a small crate near the dock slipped when someone brushed against it. The crate did not fall into the water. It shifted and rested at an angle, unstable. A man nearby looked at it, then at the tide, then stepped away. Caleb reached it moments later. He nudged it back into place with his foot and wedged a stone against the base. The crate held. The man returned and stared at it for a moment. "You fixing things now?" he asked. Caleb did not answer immediately. He looked at the crate once more, then turned away. "I am passing through," he said. The man laughed softly, more out of habit than humor. Fair enough. What the town expected, without quite admitting it, was a pattern. If someone fixed one thing, they often fixed another. If someone took notice, they usually explained themselves. Help tended to announce its reason. This did not. By the time Iris finished her work for the day, the harbor had absorbed 3 small changes without marking any of them. She packed her materials and lifted the stone from the table. The fabric stayed where she had set it. She swept the surface once, as she always did. As she turned to leave, she noticed the sign no longer tapping against the wall. She glanced toward the dock and saw the crate steady again. She did not smile. She did not frown. She walked to the edge of the street and waited for a truck to pass. When it did, she crossed and headed toward the road that curved inland. Caleb stood near the water, looking out at the tide. "You could have asked," someone said to him, not unkindly. He turned. The person gestured toward the dock. "We would have fixed it." Caleb nodded. "It is fine. That is not what I meant," the person said. Caleb did not respond. The person waited a moment, then shrugged and walked away. What unsettled the town was not that he helped. It was that he did not frame it as help. He did not linger near the work. He did not watch to see if anyone noticed. He did not return a check. And Iris, who might have been expected to acknowledge something, did not. The next day, she arrived at her table as usual. She set her bag down, unfolded her materials, and began again. Caleb passed empty-handed. "You do not need to keep doing that," she said without turning. "I am not," he replied. She nodded once. "All right." That was the closest either of them came to naming it. From the bakery window, someone observed the exchange. 2 lines. No follow-up. The expectation of gratitude dissolved quietly. What remained was a subtle reordering. People adjusted how they watched him. Less anticipation. Less assumption. They noticed Iris the same way they always had. As someone who worked. As someone who stayed within her own pace. In the evening, as light faded and the harbor settled, the repaired plank held. The sign stayed still. The crate did not move. Caleb walked the shoreline once more, stopping where the seals sometimes rested. They were not there tonight. He stood for a while anyway. Behind him, the town continued. No one clapped. No one confronted him. No one redefined him. And Iris, moving through her own evening routine, did not change her path to intersect with his. The shift had happened, not because something dramatic occurred, but because the town had expected one response and received another. Work done without claim. Presence without control. And a woman who accepted it without praise, without resistance, without needing it to become anything else. The harbor kept steady. So did the people who lived beside it. And in that steadiness, the rules adjusted, just enough to make room for what did not insist on being understood. The tension did not announce itself. It arrived quietly, settling into the spaces where nothing was said and nothing needed to be done. After the small shifts of the previous days, the town resumed its usual rhythm with an extra layer of attention that no one admitted to having. People moved as they always had, but their eyes lingered a fraction longer before looking away. Not curious, just aware. Iris Calder worked at the outdoor table again that morning. The sky stayed low and gray. Light diffused evenly across the harbor. Wind moved in short passes, never strong enough to disrupt her work for long. She anchored the fabric with a stone, adjusted the edge, and continued stitching by hand. Her posture did not change when footsteps passed behind her. Caleb Rowan walked the opposite side of the street, hands empty, pace unchanged. He did not cross toward her. He did not slow when he came in her line of sight. The distance between them held, measured and consistent, as if both of them had agreed to it without discussion. A man unloading boxes nearby paused to stretch his back and glance from Iris to Caleb, then away. He did not speak. What lingered was not expectation, but possibility. The kind that did not press forward, only hovered long enough to be noticed. Later, when Iris stood to rest her hands, she looked up and scanned the street for weather, not people. Her gaze passed over Caleb without stopping. He felt it anyway, the brief alignment of awareness, and kept his eyes on the harbor. Neither of them adjusted. The town watched that too. At the dock, the water moved steadily against the posts. The repaired plank lay flat, indistinguishable now from the others. People crossed it without looking down. A gull landed on a railing, folded its wings, and stayed there. Caleb leaned against the rail for a moment, eyes on the tide. He did not take out his notebook. He did not check the time. Behind him, Iris folded her fabric and set it aside, then reached for her coffee. She drank without looking around, then placed the cup back where it had been. The space between them remained intact. In the afternoon, fog rolled in low from the water, softening outlines again. Sounds carried differently. Voices dropped. Footsteps felt closer, even when they were not. Caleb walked along the shoreline, stopping where the seals sometimes rested. 2 of them were there now, bodies half in the water, half out. He sat on the log at a distance that did not disturb them. Across the way, Iris passed with her bag over one shoulder, heading toward the curve of the road inland. She slowed slightly when she saw him there, then continued on without changing direction. Her eyes met his briefly, not searching, not avoiding. The look held for the length of a breath, then released. Someone watching from the cafe window felt the moment without understanding why. The person noticed how the air seemed to settle afterward, as if given permission to move again. The tension did not sharpen. It widened. Evening brought colder air and a deeper gray to the sky. Lights came on early in windows along the harbor road. The bar near the corner filled slowly, voices low, laughter brief and contained. Caleb did not go in. He walked past, hands in his coat pockets, and continued toward home. Iris passed the same building from the opposite direction not long after, choosing the shorter street that led away from the noise. Her pace remained steady. She did not look back. At the intersection, they arrived at the same moment. They stopped, each waiting for the other to move first. After a beat, Caleb stepped aside. "Go ahead," he said. She nodded. "Thank you." 2 lines. No explanation. She crossed and continued on. He followed the other road. From the corner, someone noticed how neither of them turned to watch the other leave. The tension lived in what did not happen. No question asked. No help offered. No distance closed. And yet, something had shifted again, subtle enough to be missed if one was not paying attention. The town felt it as a loosening, as if everyone could breathe a little slower. Later that night, wind rattled the shutters on Caleb's place. He opened the window to listen, then closed it again when the gusts grew stronger. He sat at the table and looked at the driftwood he had smoothed earlier, running his thumb along the grain without thinking about it. Across town, Iris laid out her work for the next day, aligning edges, setting tools where she would find them in the morning. She paused once, hands resting on the table, eyes unfocused, then continued. Neither of them named what was happening. They did not need to. The tension was not a pull. It was a held line, a shared understanding that space could exist without being filled, that attention did not require action, that presence could remain intact even when nothing moved toward resolution. For those who noticed, there was something steadying in it, a quiet permission to pause, to let the moment breathe, and then to let it pass, unchanged, carrying with it only the awareness that not every connection needed to declare itself in order to be real. The next adjustment came quietly. It did not undo what had already settled. It simply refined it. The morning opened without fog, the harbor visible from end to end, water flat enough to reflect the pale sky. The cold stayed close to the surface, sharp but clean. People moved earlier than usual, taking advantage of the clear air. Iris Calder arrived at the outdoor table just after 8. She set her bag down, unfolded her fabric, and anchored the corners. The stone went where it always did. Her hands found their rhythm quickly, as if the pause of the night had never happened. Across the street, Caleb Rowan passed without stopping. He noticed her. He always did now, but he kept his line. The town registered the consistency. Later that morning, their paths aligned again near the curve of the road that led away from the harbor. The sidewalk narrowed there, forcing small decisions. One person usually stepped aside. Sometimes both did, awkwardly. This time, neither rushed. They walked side by side for several steps, not close enough to brush coats, not far enough to suggest avoidance. Their pace matched without effort. The sound of their footsteps stayed even. "I am heading toward the general store," Iris said. eyes forward. "I'm going the other way," Caleb replied. 2 lines. No pause after. They reached the split in the road. She turned inland. He continued toward the water. No hesitation followed. No glance back. From a bench near the cafe, someone noticed the clean separation. The person noted how the moment ended without requiring explanation, and how both directions remained intact. Trust shifted just slightly, not because they had moved closer, but because neither had tried to. By midday, the wind picked up again. Clouds thickened, muting the light. Iris adjusted her table, moving a few inches closer to the wall for shelter. A passerby slowed, as if to help, then stopped when she lifted the table herself and set it back down. Caleb walked past during this adjustment. He saw the movement. He kept walking. She did not look up. The exchange completed itself without words. In the afternoon, rain came lightly, barely enough to mark the ground. People took shelter where they were, knowing it would pass. The cafe filled a little, then emptied again. Caleb chose not to go in. He stood under the awning for a moment, watching the rain soften the harbor, then moved on. The decision was small. It held. Iris passed the same awning later and did not stop either. She adjusted her coat and continued down the street, fabric tucked safely under her arm. The town noticed how often they shared space without sharing direction. This was new, not dramatic, not fragile, just precise. By evening, the rain had stopped. The air cleared, leaving the smell of wet wood and salt behind. Lights came on early again. At the edge of the dock, Iris stood looking out at the water, her work done for the day. She did not step onto the boards. She stayed where the street met the harbor. Caleb approached from the opposite side and slowed when he saw her. He stopped several feet away. Neither spoke. They stood there together, the water moving steadily below, the town settling behind them. After a while, Iris shifted her weight. "I will head back," she said. "You do not have to answer yet," Caleb replied, his voice level, almost neutral. She nodded once, as if acknowledging the shape of the sentence rather than its meaning. "All right," she said. She turned and walked away, footsteps steady, not hurried. He remained where he was, eyes on the water, hands resting loosely at his sides. From a distance, someone watching felt the moment stretch and then ease. Not because anything had been resolved, but because nothing had been pressed. The boundary had been named without being drawn tighter. The trust sat where it belonged. Later, as night settled fully over the harbor, the town carried on with its quiet routines. Doors closed. Lights dimmed. The water continued its patient movement against the dock. Caleb walked home alone. Iris reached her place and set her bag down, laying out what she would need in the morning. She paused. Once, then turned off the light. No promise had been made. No distance had been closed. What had changed was simpler than that. Each of them knew where the line was. And for now, that was enough. The town accepted it without comment, holding the space open, allowing both paths to remain valid, side by side, without requiring either to merge or retreat. The evening passed. The boundary held. And in that holding, there was room to stay without needing to decide what staying would eventually mean. Movement returned to the town in smaller ways. Not enough to break the quiet, just enough to keep it from becoming flat. The morning opened with a pale strip of light along the horizon, thin and precise. The tide was halfway out, leaving the harbor floor exposed in places that were usually hidden. People adjusted their steps along the dock without comment, boots finding familiar boards, avoiding slick patches out of habit rather than attention. Iris Calder arrived at her table later than usual that day. Not late, just later. She set her bag down and paused before unfolding her fabric, looking toward the water as if checking the weather more than the time. A gull landed on the edge of the table, head tilted, then hopped away when she moved. She did not react to it. Across the street, Caleb Rowan was already there, standing near the public notice board where old flyers layered one another without urgency. He read none of them. He rested his hand against the post and looked out at the harbor. A small skiff drifted closer to the dock than it should have, its ropes stretched thin against the cleat. The tide tugged at it gently, testing the knot without malice. Someone noticed. Someone else expected Caleb to move. He did not. The owner of the skiff appeared moments later, adjusting the line with a practiced hand, tightening the knot, securing the boat. The skiff settled back into place. No one said anything. Caleb turned away first. The morning continued. Later, at the grocery store, a box of apples slipped from a shelf and rolled toward the aisle. Iris stepped back, letting them pass. Caleb stood nearby, one foot shifting to stop a single apple before it reached the door. He picked it up and set it back in the box without comment. The clerk nodded once. Iris continued down the aisle without looking over. The courtesy landed and disappeared in the same motion. Outside, the road curved gently away from the store, damp from last night's rain. A delivery truck idled too close to the curb, blocking part of the sidewalk. People stepped into the street to pass, one at a time. Iris waited for a gap, crossed, and continued on. Caleb waited as well, a few paces back, then crossed separately. They did not align their steps this time. The distance was intentional. By midday, clouds gathered again, lowering the sky. The light flattened, erasing shadows. The town seemed to compress inward slightly, sounds carrying farther than usual. At the outdoor table, Iris worked through a difficult section of fabric, fingers adjusting, pulling, setting the needle down once to reposition the cloth. The wind lifted one corner suddenly, threatening to fold it back onto itself. She reached out to steady it. From across the street, Caleb saw the movement. He did not cross. She caught the fabric, anchored it with the stone, and continued. The moment passed. A woman watching from the bakery window noticed the sequence and returned to her work without comment. In the afternoon, a brief commotion broke the pattern. A child slipped on the edge of the dock, arms flailing, catching themselves just before falling. A crate nearby shifted, but did not tip. Several people turned at once. Caleb took a step forward, then stopped. The child regained balance and laughed, embarrassed more than shaken. An older man placed a steadying hand on the child's shoulder and guided them away from the edge. Caleb stepped back. No one addressed the almost incident again. The town absorbed it as it absorbed everything else. Later, Iris finished her work earlier than expected. She folded her fabric carefully and placed it back in her bag. Instead of leaving immediately, she sat on the edge of the table and looked out toward the water, feet resting lightly against the wood. Caleb walked past along the harbor road. She noticed him without turning her head. He noticed her posture without changing his pace. They shared the space without sharing the moment. Down the street, a man struggled briefly with a jammed door at the post office. He pushed once, then again, then stepped back. Before Caleb could register the movement fully, someone else stepped in and held. The door opened. The man nodded in thanks and went inside. Caleb kept walking. The pattern repeated itself in small ways. Needs appeared and were met without ceremony. Help happened and did not happen, each in its proper place. By early evening, the clouds broke just enough to let a thin band of light stretch across the water. The harbor reflected it faintly, a line that did not last long. Iris walked toward the edge of town, taking the longer route this time. She passed the cafe without stopping, the library without looking in. Caleb passed the same buildings later, choosing the opposite side of the street. They did not cross paths. From a distance, someone might have assumed nothing connected them at all. And yet, the town felt the alignment, not in their proximity, but in their restraint, in the way moments that could have turned into something else remained exactly what they were. A courtesy offered without expectation, a near rescue that did not become a story, an action taken or withheld without explanation. As night settled in, lights came on unevenly along the harbor road. Reflections shimmered in the water, broken by gentle movement. Caleb stood once more at the edge of the dock, hands resting on the rail. He watched the tide begin to return, covering the rocks slowly, erasing the day's details. Across town, Iris set her bag down inside her place and removed the fabric, laying it out for the next morning. She adjusted one edge, then stopped, leaving it slightly imperfect, as if trusting it to hold until later. Neither of them revisited the day. They did not count the moments. The town did not either. What mattered was not the absence of drama, but the presence of motion that did not demand attention. Life continuing in small, precise increments. The kind that could be missed entirely, unless someone happened to be watching closely enough to notice that nothing had been forced and nothing had been taken. And in that gentle rhythm, the story did not pause. It simply moved forward, one unremarked step at a time. The consequence arrived quietly, almost politely. It did not come from confrontation or raised voices. It came from a detail that landed slightly wrong and stayed there just long enough to matter. The morning began like the others, pale and cold, the harbor breathing in its steady rhythm. People moved through town with their usual economy, coats zipped, hands busy. The repaired plank on the dock was now invisible, part of the whole again. Iris called her reached her table just after 8. She set her bag down and began her work without pause. The stone went to its corner. The fabric followed. Her hands found their pace. Across the street, Caleb Rowan passed once, then again, each time without stopping. Someone noticed. Not her. Not him. The pattern. At the cafe, while cups were being rinsed and stacked, a woman near the counter said something quietly to the person beside her. He walks past every day, she said. Never goes in when she is there. The other person glanced out the window. Maybe he is waiting. No, the first woman said after a moment. Maybe he does not want to interrupt. The phrase settled. It was not repeated loudly. It did not spread. It stayed close to where it was spoken. Later that morning, Iris paused to rest her hands and looked up briefly. She saw Caleb farther down the street, standing near the public notice board. He was not reading anything. He was looking toward the water. She returned to her work. At the grocery store around midday, the same woman from the cafe stood in line behind Iris. He seems considerate, the woman said, not quite to Iris, not quite away from her. The way he keeps his distance. Iris turned her head slightly. He does. 2 words. Neutral. The woman nodded, satisfied, and said nothing more. The detail had been named. Not incorrectly. Not completely. Just narrowly enough to shift its weight. In the afternoon, the wind picked up again. Clouds pressed low. The town drew inward, sounds muffled. Iris adjusted her table closer to the wall. She did it alone, lifting and setting it down with a single motion. Caleb watched from across the street. He did not move. Someone else stepped forward instead, holding the table steady while she set it in place. Iris thanked them and returned to her work. Caleb continued on. By then, the idea had taken a second shape. At the post office, a man sorting packages said to no one in particular, he lets others handle it. Another man shrugged. That is one way. The phrase was not unkind. It was not critical. It simply existed. That evening, Iris finished earlier than usual. She folded her fabric, slid it into her bag, and lingered for a moment, scanning the sky. The light was thinning quickly. She decided to take the longer route home. Caleb appeared at the end of the street as she turned. They walked toward each other, slowing slightly as they approached the narrow stretch where the sidewalk tightened. This time, Iris stepped aside first. Go ahead, she said. Caleb paused. You are fine. She shook her head once. It is all right. He passed, nodding. From a bench nearby, someone noticed the exchange and filed it away next to the earlier comments. A picture was forming, not fully accurate, not fully wrong. He does not interfere. She does not need him to. The next day, the detail repeated itself once. Only once. A loose crate near the dock shifted as the tide changed. It did not fall. It leaned. A man nearby looked toward Caleb, then back at the crate. He hesitated, then stepped forward himself and adjusted it. Caleb watched from a distance. The man finished and nodded, more to the task than to anyone else. The moment passed. By late afternoon, the town had absorbed the idea and moved on. It did not become gossip. It did not grow teeth, but it did something quieter. It clarified the boundary. Iris noticed the change in the way people moved around her work table. Fewer pauses, less waiting. She was given space without being watched for a response. Caleb noticed the change in how people looked at him. Not with expectation, not with confusion, with understanding that might not be complete, but was sufficient. That evening, they crossed paths once more near the harbor. The light was low, the water dark. You heading out? Iris asked. Yes, Caleb said. She nodded. Have a good night. You too, he replied. They went their separate ways. The consequence did not resolve anything. It did not correct itself. It simply settled, a small adjustment in how the town understood the space between them. Closer in one sense, clearer in another. No drama, no explanation, just a slightly altered alignment, held in place by repetition, quiet enough to endure. The realization did not arrive as a single thought. It unfolded across a series of ordinary moments, each one small enough to ignore on its own. Caleb, Rowan noticed. At first in the way the town no longer waited for him. On a clear morning, the harbor stretched wide and calm, the water lifting and falling with familiar patience. The repaired plank on the dock had begun to weather at the same rate as the others. Its edges softened. Its presence disappeared into the hole. A crate sat near the waterline, angled slightly by the tide. A man passing by stopped and adjusted it without looking around first. He did not scan for help. He did not call out. Caleb stood several yards away, hands in his coat pockets, watching the adjustment complete itself. No one glanced toward him. The moment closed without reference. He continued walking. Later, near the grocery store, a woman struggled briefly with a door held tight by wind. Another person stepped in and held it open. The exchange took place without words. The woman passed through. The door closed again. Caleb passed behind them, unseen, unnecessary. The town had absorbed him into its background. Not erased, placed. He walked the harbor road and noticed how his own steps no longer changed the flow around him. People did not hesitate when he approached. They did not pause, expecting assistance or restraint. They moved according to their own timing. This was new, not sudden, but distinct enough to register. At the outdoor table, Iris Calder worked with the same quiet consistency she always had. The fabric lay smooth under her hands, edges aligned with care. She paused once to check the light, then continued stitching, needle rising and falling in an even rhythm. Caleb crossed the street and passed behind her, close enough to hear the faint sound of thread pulling through cloth. She did not look up. He did not slow. The distance between them had become settled, no longer measured with caution, simply known. In the afternoon, he stopped by the library, choosing it as his single place for the day. Inside, the air was warmer still. He selected a book without lingering, returned another without comment, and left. At the desk, the librarian nodded once. Nothing else passed between them. Outside, the sky had begun to cloud over again, light flattening, colors dulling to their essential forms. Caleb walked toward the edge of town, where the road curved away from the harbor before bending back. He followed it without intention, hands loose at, his sides, breath steady. He realized then what had changed. The town did not need him to define himself. It did not require explanation, demonstration, or proof. He had not been absorbed through usefulness, nor through distance, but through consistency, through showing up without pressing in, through staying without taking space that had not been offered. His role had become clear by becoming smaller, not diminished, accurate. He stopped near the shoreline where the seals sometimes rested. Today the rocks were empty, wet and dark from spray. He stood there anyway, watching the tide roll in, covering and uncovering the same ground without hurry. Behind him, footsteps approached and then slowed. Iris came to a stop several feet away. Her presence registered more by the shift in air than by sound. She stood beside him, not close, not far, eyes on the water. They remained like that for a while. The town moved behind them, distant and contained. A gull called once and went quiet. A boat engine started and faded. I will finish earlier tomorrow, she said, as if continuing a conversation that had never begun. He nodded. All right. She did not elaborate. He did not ask why. She adjusted the strap of her bag and turned slightly toward the road. I will see you, she said. Yes, he replied. She walked away at her own pace, footsteps steady, not inviting follow-up. Caleb stayed where he was for another moment, then turned back toward town. From a distance, someone watching felt the exchange settle into place. There was no sense of something unfinished, no urgency attached to it. The understanding was complete enough. As evening approached, lights came on along the harbor road, reflected faintly in the water. The air cooled. Wind moved through the rigging of docked boats, a soft metallic sound that blended into the background. Caleb walked home without detour. Inside, he set his coat down and placed the driftwood he had worked on earlier back on the table. He did not pick it up. He did not examine it further. It was finished in the way some things were finished by being left alone. Across town, Iris laid out her work for the next day, aligning tools, folding fabric, leaving a small section unfinished where she would begin again. She did not think about whether Caleb would pass by in the morning. She did not adjust her plans around that possibility. The town had given each of them their position, not assigned, recognized. Later, as night settled fully, a man at the cafe mentioned to no one in particular, "He fits here." The comment did not invite agreement or disagreement. It simply existed. Someone else, rinsing a mug, nodded without looking up. That was the extent of it. No one revisited the misinterpretation from earlier days. No one corrected it. It had served its purpose and faded on its own. What remained was a quiet alignment. Caleb understood now that staying did not mean engaging more deeply or pulling away further. It meant holding the line he had found and not crossing it unnecessarily. Iris understood that his choice was not provisional. It did not require response. The town understood both of them as part of its steady pattern, neither central nor peripheral, simply present. For those who noticed, there was something widening in that understanding, a subtle opening, the recognition that roles did not have to be declared to be real, that belonging could exist without demand, that a person could remain exactly where they were and be enough for the space they occupied. The harbor rested under the night sky, tide moving as it always had. Caleb turned off the light and went to bed. Iris did the same, and in the quiet that followed, the town held its shape, making room without shifting its ground, allowing each of them to remain unchanged and fully seen, without needing to say anything more. The routine returned without ceremony. Morning came the way it always did in the harbor town, gray first, then slowly lighter, as if the day needed time to decide how much of itself it would reveal. The water moved in its steady pattern. The docks creaked once, then settled. Caleb Rowan woke before the light fully reached the windows. He opened them and let the sound of the tide fill the room. The air was cold enough to wake him completely. He did not stand there as long as he used to. Not because he was restless, but because the sound no longer asked to be studied. It was already familiar. He brewed his coffee and drank it standing this time, looking out rather than sitting. The mug stayed warm in his hands. The taste was the same. Outside, the street was quiet. When he stepped out, he took the longer route toward the harbor instead of cutting across town. The change was minor. It mattered anyway. His steps followed the curve of the road, then the line of the water, then back toward the center again. Same places, different order. At the dock, fishermen were already at work, hands moving with practiced ease. Caleb paused near the rail, watching a line coil neatly at someone's feet. He did not linger. He moved on without waiting for the moment to complete itself. Down the street, Iris Calder had already set up her table. She arrived earlier than she had the day before, but later than she used to. The adjustment felt natural now. Her fabric lay flat, the edges aligned with a precision that came from repetition rather than effort. She worked without glancing up as people passed. Caleb crossed the street farther down, then circled back along the opposite side. He saw her from a distance. She did not see him. The absence of that exchange no longer carried weight. He stopped at the grocery store, selected what he needed, and left without pause. Outside, the light had shifted again, clouds thinning just enough to soften the air. He adjusted his coat and continued on. By mid-morning, Iris took a short break and leaned back against the wall behind her table. She looked out toward the water, eyes unfocused, hands resting loosely at her sides. She did not search the street. A woman passing by nodded to her and kept walking. The town flowed around her work without disruption. Later, Caleb walked past the cafe without stopping, then doubled back and went in after all. He ordered coffee, drank it slowly at the counter, and left. Iris was not there. The space remained unchanged. It felt correct. In the afternoon, the wind picked up again, rattling loose signs and lifting corners of paper taped to the notice board. Someone secured one with an extra tack. Another person steadied a stack of crates near the dock. Caleb noticed these actions without attaching himself to them. Iris noticed them too, adjusting her table slightly closer to the wall as the air shifted. She did alone. No one stepped in. No one needed to. When they crossed paths later near the bend in the road, they nodded once, each continuing without slowing. The acknowledgement was brief. It did not open anything. It did not close anything either. Evening came early again. Lights turned on along the harbor road, reflections wavering in the water. The tide had returned, covering the rocks that had been exposed in the morning. Caleb walked the shoreline once more, stopping where he often stopped, then turning back sooner than usual. The pause was shorter now. The place held him without asking for more. Across town, Iris packed up her work and took a different route home than she had the night before. She passed the library first, then the cafe, then the quieter street beyond. The order felt deliberate, though she did not stop to consider why. Nothing marked the day as significant. No decision was made. No threshold crossed. And yet, the routine held a different weight. The town remained steady, unchanged in its movements, its weather, its pace. What had shifted lived beneath the surface, in how each action no longer tested the space around it. Caleb returned home and set his coat down in the same place he always did. He washed his mug and left it to dry, not bothering to wipe it immediately. Iris laid out her tools for the next morning and left one piece of fabric folded instead of flattened, trusting it to wait. Outside, the harbor settled into night, water dark and reflective, the sound of it constant. The routine had returned, but it no longer asked to be learned. It simply continued, holding both of them in their places, allowing the days ahead to arrive without pressure, without urgency, exactly as they were. The town did not change its habits. Morning still arrived with low light and quiet streets. Boats still moved when the tide allowed. Windows opened and closed according to the wind. The cafe turned its sign at the same hour every day, and the harbor kept its rhythm without adjustment. Caleb Rowan walked through these patterns without resistance. He passed the same corners, paused at the same rail, and turned back before the cold settled too deeply into his hands. Nothing pulled him forward. Nothing held him back. The absence of urgency had become part of the landscape. Across town, Iris Calder worked with the same steady focus she had carried since the beginning. Her table appeared and disappeared on schedule. People recognized her presence. Without asking questions, they stepped around her when they needed to. They returned when they chose. Neither of them tried to define what had formed. The space between them remained clear, unclaimed, and intact. They crossed paths without marking the moment. They noticed changes without naming them. Each kept their own direction, trusting the town to hold the rest. By evening, lights reflected softly across the water. The dock settled into stillness again. A gull cried once and fell silent. Someone closed a door farther down the street. Life continued at a pace that did not require explanation. There was value in being seen without correction, in staying without interruption, in allowing another person to exist nearby without pulling them closer or pushing them away. The town offered this quietly, not as a lesson, but as a condition of living there. It made room for presence without commentary. It allowed routines to return altered, not by force, but by time. Caleb reached his door and paused, just long enough to listen to the water before going inside. Iris folded her materials and left one corner slightly uneven, trusting it to wait until morning. Nothing closed. Nothing resolved. The harbor town remained, steady and unchanged, holding space for what had already settled and for what had not yet arrived. Some things did not need to move forward to continue. Some moments did not need names to remain real. The night held its shape, and in that quiet, there was room to stay a little longer simply because the town allowed it.